Tip number one doing bird photography in South Florida in the summer: make sure your lens isn't fogged up. Welcome to another video. I wanted to do one on some of the birds I've seen in about a 2-mile stretch along this lake over the last 30 odd years, and maybe just a block or two off into the neighborhood. I've seen everything from common doves to something I've only seen a few times out around this particular lake, which is a bald eagle, and everything in between. At first I started thinking, boy, I bet I could name off at least 10 different types of birds. Now, I'm not an Audubon guy, so I had to really think about it. And I'm probably closer to 30 once I really thought about it. It's been kind of interesting. Sometimes people say, well, you can just go out in your own neighborhood and find things to photograph. Well, I've been fortunate enough to live along this lake for over 30 years. And that's true, at least for me with these birds. I've had a love affair with shooting birds off and on for a long time now. One of the things you have to know if you're going to be shooting birds is you can go to the same lake, the same weather conditions, and one day see 15 different types of birds, and the next day you see 2. You just don't know. Even now I'm coming up on an area where I've seen a great blue heron every morning for the last week. And of course, now that I want to show him to you, he's not here. Welcome to bird photography. So I would say one of the things that you have to have for sure is patience and the understanding that most days you're just not going to see many and you're not going to get a good shot. But if you come out day after day, I keep looking for my heron, I don't see him. Oh, here comes a spoonbill flying right past me. No, he never made it all the way to me. I was hoping he was going to fly right past me, but he didn't. He stopped about 10 yards short, 15 yards short. There you go. Luck of the draw. If he'd come another 15 yards, I'd have gotten a beautiful shot of him landing. Instead, he came up short. Oh, and I know that bird too. It's a spoonbill. He's got a really vivid pink on the side. And he's not afraid of me at all, so he's not going to jump if I get anywhere near him. He's the bully of this area for when it comes to the spoonbills. He'll chase off the other ones. So I guess that's another tip, to understand that even from the same species of birds, they're all going to act different. They all have their own individual personality. When I first got here, I was ready to turn on my camera and show you great blue heron, and it's the one that's really skittish, and he doesn't let me within 20 yards of him. And I was just starting to turn the camera on, and I got within 20 yards and he flew off. So even from species to bird to bird, they all act different. So you need to understand that, and you need to study that a little bit. At least around this lake, the best time to come out here is just after sunrise. And depending on the time of the year, by 9 o'clock, you're not going to see nearly as many. So I don't know, it's probably about 7:30 right now. And even now, I've seen the spoonbill. I saw the one heron that flew across the way. Let's talk about some of the equipment you need and don't need. For an area like this, where you're really mostly shooting wading birds, you don't need a 600mm f4 lens. You just don't need it. Some of the best shots I've gotten recently were with a 24-120 f4, because you can get relatively close. Now, it helps if you have a camera with a pretty good autofocus on it. In years past, I've shot film with a manual focus 300mm lens. And obviously you don't get nearly as many keepers as I do now with a Z8 and a faster lens. If you're going to shoot birds a little bit more off in the distance, the birds that do their fishing, more of the raptor types out in the middle of the lake, then yeah, then that 600 f4 sure would come in handy. Even a 600 5.6 would be more than fine. Yeah, welcome to bird photography. You come out here and you want to show the bird and he's not here. Well, maybe he'll be back later. We'll walk down the other side of the lake and maybe we'll be able to pick him up. But anyway, point being, you can get bird shots with just about any camera and lens, but it sure helps if you have better equipment. That's the other thing. You have to look behind you all the time too. You look in front of you, look behind you, look on the sides, because near a lake they're going to come from just about every direction. There's a pretty common bird you'll see pretty much every day. An anhinga out drying its wings. Most of them are pretty skittish. I can't really get that close to it because he'll fly off if I get too much closer. Say he's watching me. But they're pretty common out here. What they do is they swim under the water and they spear those fish, and then they kind of just throw it up in the air just a hair and then eat it down. But you'll see them out in the water and they'll just all of a sudden you'll see their head bob up, and then a couple of minutes later maybe you'll see them again a little bit further down and they've got a fish at the end of their bill there. Another thing that I've noticed, I've mentioned in another video, since I started using the Z8 for these birds, is my Z7 II was limited to 1/8000th of a shutter, and ordinarily you'd think, well, that's pretty darn good, right? And it is. But I've noticed that sometimes I'll push the ISO to 800 or beyond, even 1600, so I could pump that shutter. I pump that shutter a little bit faster, and I like the images a little bit more. It could just be that the Z8, the autofocus on the Z8 picks up the birds better than the Z7 II. It could be that, but I don't think so. I think that because you're shooting 20 frames a second. Oh, here comes a spoonbill coming my way. I think I got him that time. If I did, I'll show you one. That's why I say you have to just kind of keep your eyes peeled. That's why I'm not always looking in the camera. I'm looking all around. Another thing about bird photography that people might not think about, if you're going to do it in a residential area like this is, pretty much every day somebody's going to come up behind you and start talking to you. You could be zeroed in on a bird for half an hour and waiting for that bird to do something, and somebody will walk up behind you and say, "What are you doing?" Happens more than you would think. I was just shooting that spoonbill, and a neighbor that I don't see too often, he lives a couple blocks down from me. Nice guy, I didn't mind it at all. He actually waited until I was done. He had courtesy. But yeah, he started talking to me for probably 15-20 minutes. So you get thrown off your game, but that's okay. We're all social animals to some degree, right? Can't fault a neighbor for wanting to say hello. But be prepared for that. People will come up, and I've had people that, especially tourists, that are down here, the snowbirds that come down in January, February. I've literally had them come up and tap me on the back while I'm focused in on something. I mean, I'll hear somebody coming, obviously, but they'll come right up and hit you right on the back. "Hey, what are you doing?" Like, it's, dude, personal space, you know? So be prepared for that. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's a pretty rare bird out here, and that's a juvenile night heron. You don't see night herons out here too often. When they're fully mature, they're a beautiful bird. You see them more a little bit further out west, but he might he might be searching out a new territory being a juvenile. Another tip I learned over the years, don't wear a radio. I mean, if you're out walking and you want to wear a headset and just listen to your music, fine. But if you're out shooting birds, don't wear a headset. I'll tell you why. It's because you can hear different birds calling or making sounds off in the distance. Like I just heard the sound of a great blue heron squawking, and I saw him fly across the lake. So I don't know by the time I get back down there if he's still going to be there or not. But I know he's down there right now. If I had my headset on, I wouldn't have heard it. The other thing about coming out early in the morning is, other than you don't have a lot of foot traffic, you don't have the people with their dogs, you know, in a residential area like this is. By 9 o'clock you get the boats and the especially on weekends, you get the boats and the ski jets and you get the waves in the water. But early in the morning you don't have a breeze for the most part, and the water's calm, and you can get some reflections. So that's another, and you get better light. Of course, as a photographer, you want the light. You get a little bit more muted light along the coast of the lake, which is nice. And eventually you get the speckled light as the sun comes up and goes through the trees. So you get different light. But it's particularly important you get that calm water in the morning. You get some reflections. So that's another tip. I mean, you'll learn what your best shutter system is for the type of bird you're photographing. It might not be the same as for what I'm photographing. So you'll learn that over time, hit and miss. So I'm just trying to give you some tips on things that I've learned from being out here for over 30 years. That's why I say some of them don't care. You can get right up on them and film them, photograph them, and they don't mind so much. Just don't bother them while they're hunting. Others, you get within 10-15 yards of them and they'll fly off every time. Depends on the individual bird. A few more tips if you're going to photograph the blue herons. Because they're a wading bird, obviously they kind of walk across the water or through the water, and they'll walk at a quicker pace than what you might suspect. So you want to stay in front of them as best you can, and you want to look and see if there's any trees that are about to come up, or high bushes or weeds or something, because if that bird is to lift off, you don't want to just get one or two shots and then it's behind the tree, and then by the time it gets back out away from the tree and in focus, it's too far away. So you want to get, if it's coming up to, on a tree, you want to get in front of the tree, in front of the bird, and getting back in focus. And the other thing, which is very important, which it's very difficult to do, I still screw it up all the time, is understand that these birds have a pretty quick liftoff, and they go high. They jump higher than what you might think. They don't necessarily stay along the water and then eventually rise. They'll jump a couple of feet. And so unless you have a wider point of view, a wider focal length, I guess you want to say, where even if they jump, you'll still have it all in the screen, in the image, then you're okay. But if you're kind of close in on that bird and it jumps, that wingspan is so much, is, I don't know, 5 feet. If you don't have your camera pointed up a little bit higher, the tips of the wings aren't going to be in the image. And I make that mistake a lot. So either back off on your focal length, or kind of have your camera raised up a little bit, expecting that bird to jump high. So that's just a couple of tips that you might not think of when it comes to shooting herons in order to get them. A bonus tip that I don't think I've mentioned yet is look up in the trees. A lot of times the birds are just sitting up in the trees. One of the best shots I've got this year was because there was a heron sitting up in the tree. I had to wait almost an hour for that bird to take off, but I got this shot right here. Patience and looking up in trees, and that's what you'll get. Well, I guess it's time to head home, have some breakfast. Been out here about 2.5 hours. I did see a wide variety of birds, but getting that night heron, that was worth the trip out here. So again, you don't know what you're going to get from day to day. If you're going to be a bird photographer, you just kind of have to get out and see what you can find. I appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe if you learned something. Even if you didn't, you could still subscribe anyway. I'll put out these dopey videos from time to time. And until next time, take good care of yourselves. See you soon.